Thank you, Dr. Williams. Susan, as you know, received her PhD in voice from Cleveland Institute of Music last fall sometime, as I believe. Thank you, Glenn, as well. I want to share with you today two healing stories. One story happens in the middle of the first. I'm reading to you today from the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, fell at Jesus' feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed Jesus and pressed in on Jesus. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And Jesus' disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" Jesus looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before Jesus and told him the truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Now while he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Jairus, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, and the brothers of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When Jesus had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with them and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. Jesus strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat. The word of the Lord. Amen. And now, a word from our sponsor. Do you know the first time I heard that saying, "And now a word from our sponsor"? I might have been 6 or 7 years of age. I was sitting on the carpet in our family room, my brothers on either side of me, my parents sitting on the couch, the sofa behind us. I can't tell you what we were watching. It was 1968, 1969, could have been any number of things. It was probably in black and white. But I remember the announcer came on the television and said, "And now a word from our sponsor." And almost at the same time as the announcer said, "And now a word from our sponsor," I heard from behind me my father harumph. Now he was almost half joking and half serious, but he harumphed. He said, "Another commercial interruption. We might as well be living in Russia for all these commercials. At least in Russia we wouldn't have to put up with all these commercials." Now, at 6 or 7 years of age, I didn't know much about Russia. I didn't know about communism, although I'd heard the word before. It was always said with a negative tone. I didn't know anything about the Cold War at that time. All that I knew about Russia at that time, I had learned from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show. You remember Natasha and Boris, don't you? They had taught me that Russia, whatever it was not a good place. Natasha and Boris were evil people. I knew that there was something seriously wrong, seriously dark about Russia. Well, and you know how kids are. Sometimes they put 2 and 2 together and they come up with 5. I heard my father say, for all these commercial interruptions, we might as well be living in Russia. At least in Russia, we wouldn't have all these interruptions. In my small 6 or 7-year-old mind, I put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. I thought, my goodness, Russia is a pretty bad. Russia is a pretty dark and evil place. Can you imagine just how much more dark, how much more evil then interruptions must be? That's how it calculated out in my mind. Interruptions must be bad. Well, you know, as life goes on and we become grown-ups and adults, you have to admit we're not all that good with interruptions, are we? Whether they're the small little interruptions on this end of the continuum, you know what I'm talking about, a commercial interruption during our favorite television show, for example. Or perhaps an interruption like the telephone ringing just as we sit down to dinner with our family or friends. And it's an automated call from one of the telephone solicitors again. Those are the little nuisance interruptions we experience, right? And if you move a little further on in the continuum, about the center of the continuum, we might experience a little more serious kind of life interruptions. Say like, oh, I don't know, your adult children decide to move back home and live with mom and dad again. That's a bit of an interruption, is it? A little more serious than a commercial interruption, but not maybe quite as serious as the interruptions at this end of the continuum. Because at the very end of the continuum, the very serious interruptions of our lives include things like losing a job in a time of economic crisis. Interruptions at this end of the continuum might be something like experiencing a serious life-threatening illness that interrupts our life journey. And at the very end of the continuum, of course, would be the ultimate interruption to our life's journey, which would be the death of a loved one, or perhaps our own death, which ultimately interrupts life's journey. We're not so good with the interruptions. They upset the balance. They upset the order that we've tried to create for our lives. How we've divided our life into orderly spaces and orderly time units and our plans. And we've sort of calculated out the life journey, and then these interruptions come along and they upset that. They scramble the ducks we've so neatly put in a row. Well, I'm here today to tell you something very radical. I'm here today to tell you that the interruptions themselves that we experience along life's journey are, in fact, life itself. I'm here today to tell you that if you want to meet God and you want to have an experience of God and you want to embrace and welcome God into your life and embrace God's powerful and miraculous healing spirit in your life, then we need to get comfortable with the interruptions that come our way.